Welcome to this continuing professional development session on information management. Estate agency is one of the professions which relies implicitly on information management, and it is self-evident that it forms the backbone of most successful estate agency enterprises. Information management takes raw data, which cannot be used in itself, and makes it more meaningful by shaping it into information. How this is done is probably the gist of what we are going to discuss today. To be useful to the enterprise and to support its business processes, data must be organized, and most enterprises will use an appropriate data model to arrange the data into a hierarchy of data elements and data structures. Without doing so, the data cannot be used as information, and while it may be collected, it is simply going to gather dust. The data has to be manipulated to become useful to the estate agency enterprise. Data items are characterized by data type, and this may include, and it depends on the individual preferences of the estate agency firm concerned, numbers, text, data, time units. Normally, experience will indicate to the enterprise which is the most appropriate for them to use. One must understand the different levels of an enterprise when distinguishing the types of information that are generated and processed. It stands to reason that each organizational level will have different requirements in respect of such aspects as origin. Is the information required internal or external to the organization concerned? The time frame. One generally looks at a time frame from a point of view of short, medium, or long-term information, and the level of detail. As we will see, the different organizational structures will require different levels of detail. What management requires will be entirely different from the detail that is required by persons working on the shop floor. Many successful estate agency enterprises have been found to successfully use commercially available software, and by so doing, they are able to derive the maximum value from their information assets. It is important to note that information is an asset. Like any other asset of the firm, information must be correctly dealt with if it is to be useful and if it is to become a valuable asset to the organization itself. We must look now at the difference between data and information. As I've said, data is useful, but it cannot be used for informational purposes. Data is raw and unprocessed streams of fact that come into the organization. And this may be in the form of numbers, images, other forms of computerized output, which are all known as data. Raw data, though, is a relative term. Data processing generally has a number of stages. Well, this means that the output of one processing stage may become the raw data for the processing of the next stage. So again, raw data must be looked at in its individual context. Remember that only once data has been processed and shaped into a meaningful form can it be used as information. Data, useful, yes. To be used as information, not quite yet. We will get there. Now, there are ways and means of handling this raw data. Data in itself is not generally very useful for analysis purposes. That data must be manipulated so that it can be converted into information, and it is the information that will be used by the estate agency organization. There are many, many ways of manipulating the data. One can, for example, summarize the data, because once the data has been summarized, once that raw data is taken, looked at and summarized, one can then, first of all, determine the reliability of the data, and secondly, by examining the data, understand what the main features of that data are. It often helps to graphically represent the data. I'm sure that many of you will have observed that by taking a mass of raw data and simply creating that data into a simple graph, whether it be a line graph or a scatter graph or any other graph that is useful to you, or a pie chart, enables you immediately to grasp the nature of that data and to ascertain what the salient features of that data are. Having done so, you are now in the process of converting the data into an informational asset. The typical values of the data must also be considered. For example, in the estate agency environment, one might look at such things as what is the average income of households in the area in which the estate agency operates? Or if the estate agency wishes to open up a branch in a new area, what is the category of persons resident in the area? What is the income? What do they do? Where do they go? These are things that an estate agency enterprise needs to know and understand, and this raw data, once converted into information, becomes especially useful. One needs to have a look at variations in the data as well. If, for example, one is looking at acquiring an investment property, there is no doubt that one would look on the varying returns on investment that are relative to the value of the property that is being purchased. Finally, it is necessary to assess whether there are any abnormal patterns in the data, because if you will find abnormal patterns, the data may be skewed, the data may be not representative of the true state of affairs. And what does this mean? It means that the data could generally not be reliable. To make decisions on unreliable data, even once that data is transferred into information, is a mistake that most people will sincerely regret. What information is required for strategic decision making? Remember, in an organization, we have different levels. Generally speaking, it may be said that the senior management, the principals of the estate agency enterprise, and the senior management of that enterprise will only really want to look at general strategic issues. They will not be focusing as such on the operational environment, which has been delegated to persons working lower down the organogram of that organization. So what are they interested in? Senior management wants to see the overall development of the enterprise and wants to take a long-term view of the enterprise. Where is the enterprise going? What is its mission? What is its vision? How is it going to get there? These are the matters that will be in the minds of the senior management. Consideration is given by senior management to strategic issues which have a bearing on the future standing and future positioning of the enterprise. They are not so much concerned with the enterprise as it exists at present, but they have in their minds a strategic idea of where they want that enterprise to be, how it is going to get there, and what it's going to look like once it does get there. So what can we say? Information at the senior management and principal level will usually be comprehensively gathered, not only from the internal resources of the estate agency firm, but also from appropriate external resources. One expects principals of an estate agency enterprise to be mindful of the existence of external socio-political economic data and general sector indicators and trends. It is for this reason that senior managers need to understand that socio-political economic data, which is readily available, one merely has to go to Professor Google and one will find a variety of sources of information of this nature. And as senior management, it is expected of them to do so. They're expected to understand what the trends in the sector are, how any negativity affecting the sector will impact on the firm in particular. At the operational level, however, decisions are not so much focused on the future of the enterprise, but rather on the smooth running and functioning of all necessary operational processes on a day-to-day business level. So what the principals are required to do to ensure the success of the smooth functioning of the business is to ensure that resources are sufficiently allocated and used, and that operational plans are properly implemented. Operational plans, where do they derive? Operational plans will basically be derived from the principles of the enterprise and will then be communicated down to the lower levels, but one should always ensure that the support of lower levels in the development of an operational plan is obtained and that the buy-in is there. Failing this, one may find that the operational plan will not be as successful as could be anticipated. Rational decision-making at this level, that is the lower level, the level below that of the principals, requires information that is almost entirely internal to the enterprise. At this level, one is not looking at external resources. One doesn't really worry so much about the socio-political economic factors that have already been taken into account by the principals of the organization. But what one needs where internal resources are concerned is accurate information, detailed information, and real-time information. It is no use getting information about something that happened 6 months ago. That is not going to assist in the smooth running of the enterprise, since 6 months ago is history and one needs real-time information. Information for effective decision-making at the managerial level, typically has a time frame ranging from weeks to several months to a year, but I would suggest that it's more weeks than months or years. Managerial decisions at this level are made in respect of such aspects as medium-term scheduling, forecasting, budgeting. These decision-making activities will, however, take place in the internal environment, but hopefully with the inputs of the principal, failing which they may not be successful. Sometimes management does need to know and understand and appreciate the value of external information, but I think that this would rest mainly with the principals of the enterprise, who would then be tasked with supplying any external information that their managers may require. For example, a manager setting a quarterly budget requires knowledge of things like current expenditure. He also needs to know what the envisaged trends and developments within the sector in general are, and he needs to understand the environment within which the state agency enterprise operates. I think it's invaluable for the manager at this stage, when setting the quarterly budget, to basically communicate with the principals and to obtain this external information, which should be readily available through the principals. Now, constructing a data model. To be useful to the enterprise and to support its business processes, it is generally required that appropriate data model be constructed, because this data model will determine how data items are arranged, and they are generally arranged into a hierarchy of what we call data elements and data structures. Data items are characterized by data type, and by this I mean numbers, text, date, time units. These are all aspects of data type. Standard data types such as text, or a series of characters comprising, say, characters from the alphabet. It could be dates, hours, minutes, seconds, and other symbols or numbers, either integers or decimals, are commonly used in business information systems. Now, this might sound Greek to a lot of people who are watching this. So what I would suggest is, when it comes to the constructs of a data model, one necessarily takes the advice of your IT manager or your IT department, who will certainly assist you in understanding these basic concepts. They will tell you, as I think we all know by now, that computers store data using strings of coded characters. And these coded characters are based on a standard character set, with each single character set representing a standardized coding system. A database management system, which I think every single estate agency enterprise relying on data for the creation of information and for the construct of a business model desperately needs, will allow the enterprise to manage, secure, and analyze the data, as well as to interface to other software applications. This again emphasizes the importance of IT in the general running and the success of modern estate agency enterprises. Information policy documents. Most enterprises that I'm aware of will provide specific guidelines to their employees, to the contractors, trading partners, and to other external stakeholders on the processing, storage, communication of various types of information. And how do they do this? They do so by creating what we all know as an information policy document. Any estate agency enterprise using IT systems and using computer-generated data and information should conceivably have an information policy document that they may rely on. This document is one that is invaluable when, for example, dealing with security-sensitive data, or where the sector is required to comply with legislation relating to information processing. We are all aware of the new POPI Act, Protection of Personal Information Act. This act falls fairly and squarely into the category of complying with data relating to the information that an estate agency firm is likely to obtain. So it will also be dealt with in the information policy document. In fact, POPI will probably feature very strongly in such an information policy document. The information policy document also will clarify and define sensitivity levels of information. We know that not every level of the hierarchy of an estate agency enterprise, where we are talking about the bigger enterprises, will be permitted to access the same information that other levels will be able to access. Management may be a super user. In other words, they are entitled to access all the information relevant to the firm. But as one goes down the levels of the organizational hierarchy, the succeeding levels may only be entitled to access different levels of information. The aim of the information policy is to ensure that, again, the information assets, and remember, information is an asset and must be treated as any other asset of the firm, that the information assets are fully protected from threats or disclosure. Most estate agency enterprises will have developed an information strategy, and this strategy will be so designed that it supports the overall business strategy of that enterprise. The information strategy will clarify how information must be captured, how it must be processed, how it must be used, and most importantly of all, how and when it should be disposed of during the information life cycle. There will come a time in the information life cycle that information that has been captured is no longer required, and there should then be an identification of which information is no longer necessary, how long that information should be kept, and when it should be disposed of. There are many common elements that will be contained in an information strategy, and some of these include, for example, an overview of information resources. I'm not going to go into what that basically is, and you can read the slide by yourself. But remember, an overview of information resources is very important to know and understand. One would look at information architecture and the IT structure. One would look at external factors, and there we're going to analyze competitors, the economy, government policy, and technological advances. And who is going to do that? That is going to be done by senior management or the principals of the enterprise. Opportunities, the identification of opportunities available to the enterprise is something that all principals will know and understand immediately. They need to analyze new business opportunities that arise from new information era and from the technologies that are continually being developed. This will be done, obviously, in liaison with the IT department of the enterprise concerned. Risk analysis. Every single estate agency enterprise needs to undertake a risk analysis looking at internal and external threats and an analysis of the various steps required to ensure that the enterprise complies with legislation and regulations, and also create a summary of information usage by competitors. Remember, you are working in an environment where there is much competition, and it is always essential to bear in mind what competitors may be thinking and what competitors may be doing, so you are able to base your information strategy on the knowledge that you have gained. One should also create a schedule listing milestones and review dates to assess, monitor, and remediate the strategy. If the information strategy is not working, it needs to be remediated. If it is working, it probably needs always to be improved. One should at least examine the information strategy on an annual basis. Decentralized information can create problems. Without an enterprise-wide plan and data administration procedure in place, the enterprise is likely to encounter at least some of the following problems, which all estate agency enterprises should be aware of. The first one is data redundancy. What this means is that the data is duplicated at great expense to the enterprise. That data which is duplicated is stored at various locations and in more than one file. This means that the enterprise is wasting valuable resources, both human and financial, when data is duplicated and becomes redundant in various respects. Then there's the question of poor data availability. One finds, and this has been the experience of many organizations, that data tends to become isolated and available only to the owner of a particular file in the overall file system. This means the silo mentality kicks in. People do not wish to share the data, and they wish to be the custodians of their own data and gatekeepers of data. The poor data availability can only be to the detriment of the estate agency enterprise. The sharing of data and the visibility of data to employees is substantially reduced under such circumstances, and in worst cases is entirely eliminated. This means that people do not know what is going on in the organization, concentrate only on their particular minimal activities, and results in the organization not being used optimally, and that the information that is obtained is often reduced to meaningless quality. Poor data security is something that all enterprises need to be aware of. One finds that when data is spread across the enterprise in various forms and locations, this reduces the ability of the enterprise to establish adequate security controls and ensure only authorized access to information. It is the opposite of the fact that some people tend to hog their data. Here, everybody has access to data, and even those who should not be having access to certain data are able to do so. And then finally, one sees error-prone data. One finds that the same data exists at multiple locations throughout the enterprise, and because it does exist at so many locations, it becomes vulnerable to human error. That means more and more people are working with that data. And different employees introduce different errors and mistakes which tend to be hidden and go unnoticed for a longer and longer period to the detriment of the enterprise. So how can information systems support business processes? There are numerous business processes in most estate agency enterprises. And for example, one would look at the sales department, where what do they need? They want data concerning sales, and this should be made available to them as and when they need it. The finance and accounting department uses sales data to generate invoices and process payments. Without the generation of invoices and the processing of payments, even the best run estate agency enterprise is going to run aground. The marketing department, what do they want? They want client data and sales information for effective marketing campaigns. Unless they receive this information, the marketing department is not going to be performing at its optimal level. The human resources department stores information regarding the employees of the enterprise, their competencies, skills, professional development needs, training, and also compliance with education and training requirements prescribed by regulation. An integrated central database enables the organization to function effectively, and it is then able also to rely on accurate, reliable, and real-time information, which we have previously identified as being essential to the effective running of an estate agency enterprise. We talked about the Protection of Personal Information Act, and just to re-emphasize that POPI ensures that institutions act responsibly in the collection, in the processing, storing, and sharing of the personal information of entity by making such institutions accountable should they abuse or compromise personal information. Estate agents, principals, and directors should make a concerted endeavor to ensure that they know and understand the requirements of POPI, because it is certainly going to impact on their informational requirements. Personal information is considered to be precious goods in terms of POPI, and the owner of the personal information is granted certain rights and protection and the ability to exercise control over such aspects as, and these are contained in the Act, when and how the personal information may be shared, since the consent of the person to share the information is required, the type and extent of the information that the person chooses to share, as information can only be collected for valid reasons. Remember, information can only be collected for valid reasons, and if there is no valid reason for collecting information, one might run foul of the requirements of the Protection of Personal Information Act. There must be transparency and accountability on how personal data is to be used, and there is a requirement to notify persons if and when that data becomes compromised. We also need, in terms of Protection of Personal Information Act to provide a person with access to that person's own information. If they want access to their own information, they are entitled to receive that access. And they also have the right, furthermore, to have data removed and or destroyed should they wish to do so. POPI also provides who has access to the personal information that is maintained by an enterprise, in the sense that the enterprise must have adequate measures and controls in place to track access and to prevent unauthorized persons, even from within the enterprise itself, from accessing the personal information that has been stored by the enterprise. One needs also to know how and where the personal information is stored. Adequate measures and controls must be put in place to safeguard the information, that personal information that is being stored, and to protect the information from the risk of theft or from being compromised. And finally, the integrity and continued accuracy of the personal information, which must, it should be noted, be correctly captured once collected, must be accurately maintained. If the information is not correctly captured, the enterprise runs a very real risk of not being in compliance with the provisions of the Protection of Personal Information Act. What is personal information? Personal information could include such aspects as the identity and or passport numbers of people, the date of birth and age of people, their telephone numbers, whether landline or cell phones, email addresses, online instant messaging identifiers, physical address, gender, race and ethnic origin, photos, voice recordings, video footage, biometric data, marital relationship status and family relations, criminal record. A private correspondence also falls within the definition of personal information. Religious or philosophical beliefs, including personal and political opinions, employment history and salary information, financial information, education information, physical and mental health information, including medical history, blood type, sexual preference, etc., and membership of organizations and or unions. One can therefore see that the gamut of what is personal information is extremely wide, and that the Protection of Personal Information Act offers protection over a whole range of information that many estate agency enterprises will, during the course of their activities, receive and be able to collate and retain. So estate agency enterprises are in a very specific position where POPI is concerned and need to understand that that personal information needs to be protected and needs to be dealt with in accordance with the requirements of POPI. Information that does not allow a third party to confirm or infer a person's identity to the extent that such information can be used and or abused for other purposes is not regarded as personal. The combination of a person's name and telephone number and or email address, for example, may be considered more significant for the purposes of POPI than a person's name or telephone number on its own. The Protection of Personal Information Act thus defines a unique identifier as data which, and this is what the Act says, uniquely identifies that data subject in relation to that responsible party. There is a responsibility in the information age for persons also to take full responsibility to protect their own personal information. Thus, if a person willingly places information in the public domain through the use of social media, that information certainly cannot be protected, and one cannot rely on the Protection of Personal Information Act to do so. The right to the protection of personal information applies not only to individuals, but also to any legal entity, including a close corporation, a company, or any other constitutional organization. These entities are defined in the Protection of Personal Information Act as data subjects, and as such are granted the same right to protection of their information. Individuals and legal entities are known in the Act as responsible parties, and they have a similar obligation to protect the personal information of other parties. An estate agency enterprise in particular must protect information concerning, for instance, and this is not an exhaustive list, its employees, suppliers, vendors, service providers, business partners, and so forth. Ensuring compliance with POPI in the day-to-day operations of an estate agency enterprise will probably require, and each estate agency enterprise will have to assess its own unique position in this respect, the education and training of management and staff, a reviewing, streamlining, and updating of business processes, and implementing or updating technology solutions. POPI lists the following conditions for the lawful processing of personal information, and each condition is dealt with in a separate section of the Act. And I'm just going to tell you what these sections are without going into further details, so that one can realize that POPI is a comprehensive piece of legislation that does require careful study if it is going to be adequately complied with. It refers to accountability, processing limitation, purpose specification, further processing limitation, information quality, openness, security safeguards, and data subject participation. I would therefore urge all estate agency enterprises to access the website of the information regulator to ensure that they are aware of developments in respect of the Protection of Personal Information Act, and that they remain fully compliant, because the penalties that are imposed by the Act for non-compliance are actually quite horrendous. The maximum fine is 10 million rand or 10 years imprisonment if somebody is found to have not complied with the provisions of the Protection of Personal Information Act. So there is no pussyfooting around where POPI is concerned. The website may be accessed at the URL given on the slide. And as I say, I would urge every estate agency enterprise through its principals and through its management to access this website regularly and ensure that they remain fully compliant with the requirements of the Protection of Personal Information Act. Now, information security management is also another very important aspect of information management. And in this respect, one would look at the International Standards Organization 27002. Now, the International Standards Organization is an organization that creates documents which provide requirements, specifications, guidelines, or characteristics that are used to enhance the processes or services of organizations and ensure that those processes and services are fit for use. Insofar as information security management is concerned, one is looking at ISO 27002, which is the International Standards Organization document that addresses the security of information in most formats and suggests the implementation of information security management by gathering the enterprise's information security requirements. Without going into too much detail, can simply be said that ISO 27002 provides the following steps. One needs to initially perform a risk assessment. This is aimed at identifying the vulnerabilities and threats and their likelihood of causing an information security breach. And if a security breach is likely, what the consequences of that breach to the business operations of the enterprise will be. One must study the legal requirements and ensure that the enterprise fully understands all legislative and contractual requirements pertaining both to itself as well as to its stakeholders, and ensuring that such legal requirements are fully complied with. One needs to furthermore scrutinize all requirements internal to the enterprise. It is necessary to undertake, as ISO 27002 says, a thorough examination of information management processes, methods and practices within the enterprise, and identify information security needs and requirements that may be unique to the enterprise. Having done so, the enterprise is now in a position to establish such core security practices, and ISO gives these practices as allocating responsibility for information security, developing an information security policy document, ensuring that all applications process information correctly, managing information security incidents and effecting improvements as a result of such incidents, establishing a technical vulnerability management process, providing security training and awareness, and developing a continuity management process. The information security program must respect intellectual property rights, safeguard enterprise records, and protect personal information. It can therefore be seen that the development of an information security program is integral to the success of any estate agency enterprise, and that the failure to develop such an information security program will definitely redound to the prejudice of an estate agency enterprise. I would urge all principals and all managers of estate agency enterprises to have regard to ISO 27002 where this is concerned, since that document is very succinct in setting out what needs to be done, how it needs to be done, and what must happen to ensure that security practices where information management are concerned are secured. The underlying objectives of the information security management are to ensure that information security incidents are properly ascertained and reported. One must therefore know what is an information security incident, and it will be up to the management and staff of an estate agency enterprise to determine what an information security incident will be. There can be little doubt that there will be information security incidents, and should these occur, they need to be reported immediately by using appropriate management reporting channels. A formal information security event reporting procedure must be established by the enterprise, and most importantly, it is up to management and the directors of the estate agency enterprise to ensure that a culture is created that emphasizes such aspects as strong accountability, that views information as a corporate asset, which we've tried to stress during this presentation, that promotes management and staff awareness and education, and that creates clear expectations for and an understanding of the consequences of information security management. I hope that this presentation has opened the doors to information management, has disclosed many of the pitfalls that are likely to be encountered by estate agency enterprises in this ongoing and uniquely developing sphere of management. So that brings me to the conclusion of the presentation. Please remember, though, to answer the 10 multiple choice questions to obtain your 5 verifiable CPD points for this session. Thank you.